This is the guide curve paving mini workflow. So if you look closely at your paving area here, we have a herringbone pattern within it and a color scheme that is creating a gradient from one side to another. We'll go over here to our grasshopper RCP panel and we will shift our paver type to a surface so that we can see that gradient a little bit better. And if you look closely, you can see that we have a curve here that seems to suggest a directionality to this gradient. So if we navigate to our Rhino layers, we can see we have a color guide curve layer here. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to guide the color scheme that you're seeing here of the different swatches that we're choosing. So in our grasshopper panel are different colored swatches. And it's going to create a gradient starting from the beginning of the curve to the end of the curve, ensuring that you have a consistent gradient across the distance of this curve. So if I were to shorten this curve, it's going to shorten that gradient so that everything perpendicular past the starting point of this curve will be a solid color of the first swatch. Then it will create a gradient from that swatch to the middle color that we've chosen onto the third color and create a perpendicular line from that end point that ensures that all of the pavers past that end point are the third swatch color. So simply by changing these colors around, we can see how we can shift the colors within that gradient. We can make them all a little bit darker if we want to. And we can even extend this curve out to create a much wider gradient that expands even further across our paving area. And when we rotate it, it maintains that directionality of this curve to ensure that you have a consistent gradient from one point of this curve to the other. Now, this curve can also be other shapes, such as an arc or a NURBS curve of sorts, to create a gradient that moves along the directionality from endpoint to endpoint of this particular curve. And you can see how that reflects in the gradient to create a triangular-like shape as it meets. As the perpendicular cutoff points for these colors meet each other, we have a meeting of the first swatch and the last swatch. So being able to create very unique and unusual gradient patterns across a paving area can be done using a variety of different curve shapes. So how does this plug into the grasshopper script over here? We have our standard setup of our geometry pipeline bringing in our paving area as a curve or a surface or breadth to create our area. And we're adding the pattern to the area so we can change that pattern as much as we want. And that gradient of colors is still maintained. And then as we trim the pavers, we feed that through an add color rule. And within that color rule, we plug in the gradient curve color rule, which allows us to input a curve geometry using another geometry pipeline that matches this layer. And that guide curve is being used in conjunction with the colors input here in our draw area pattern to generate the color schemes that we have here. We can even add more colors to this gradient if we'd like, in order to create a much more dynamic gradient across our paving area. So again, the first color and the last color will dictate the cutoff points for where that color starts and then creates the gradient between each of the colors between these two until we reach the other endpoint.